pioneering solutions, transformational technology, and inspirational leaders. I'm your host, Conor Sherman, and this is the Confident Defense Podcast. Welcome to the Confident Defense Podcast. I'm your host, Conor Sherman, and today our guests are Brian Tant and Brad Herring, the CTO and VP of Business Development for Raxis. Raxis safely brings adversary emulation services ranging from pen testing to red teaming so security leaders can make more intelligent investment decisions. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
So, Brian, Brad, I would love to get from your perspective, what is red teaming, right? I can read 1,000 articles on crabs. I can come through and everyone's got like the slightly different variation on where does pen testing begin and end? When does red teaming begin and end? Where does the blue team come involved? So we're going to go deep into the weeds today. We're going to talk about all sorts of cool stories. But before we do that, let's just level set on some basic terminology and kind of what it is that you guys are doing in that red teaming pen testing space.
So I can speak to that. Typically, when you say red teaming, there's a lot of fuzz around the definition, and it's called tiger teaming and that kind of stuff. But really, it boils down to you've got a team of adversarial engineers. They have disparate complementary skill sets. Typically, one guy's better at lock picking, another guy's better at whatever. And you bring these teams together to mount a coordinated assault against your customer in hopefully ways that the customer can anticipate, so that they can react and engage their processes as well as their security controls.
Got it. Okay. So how far on the spectrum are we getting into Mission Impossible style, right? Where we're coming into the window inside the towers in Dubai.
We've done it. Yeah. I mean, it really depends on what the customer is comfortable with. We've taken doors off the hinges. We've broken into buildings. But then some folks are just not, it doesn't do a lot of good for some people to know that their door can be taken off the hinges, right? So they set the limits of what's acceptable and what's not, and we'll go as far as they want.
Got it, because you're tailoring the attack sequence to help them with their next steps to their investment, right? So Sure. If I understand it correctly from the conversation we're having off camera, you're really positioning this testing in this adversarial emulation, not for the sake of saying, hey, we can, walk through your front door. It's so that you can then take that data to the board, take that data to whomever the stakeholders are, right, and invest in the security where appropriate.
Right. And Brad's really good at kind of distilling that down as to what the customer's needs are and where the sweet spot of value would be for them, so that they don't overspend and get some big, dramatic production. They get something that's actionable. They get something they can take to maybe use for funding or use for headcount, or that kind of something that's actionable within the organization. So it empowers them as a security organization rather than it's just a big hoopla.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we have some customers that say, "Hey, hit us!" Right? We want to know, what can the bad guy do? All bets are off. Come at us. But then we have others that will confine that very specifically. So, hey, hit us, but only from an external perspective, right? And if you're managed to make that bridge and get in, you can, but only if you're from outside, and pretty much anywhere in between.
Got it. So you can hit me, but only with your left hand on an extra Tuesday after I've had coffee, right? Something like that. So you get really specific in the techniques. Right. That makes sense. Okay, so if I want to just if I think about it, we're talking about generally there's 3 categories. I want to make sure that we're right-sizing. We've got pen testing, where we're looking for technical vulnerabilities. Can the adversary, regardless of where the human stands in the mix, can they find a weakness, break through, and do a technical escalation to their objective? Social engineering, where you launch the attack and you're really looking to dupe the human, have them click on the link, make the mistake, open the door for you, that type of thing. And then red teaming is you just use all those tools in your bat belt to achieve an objective, kind of no matter where that objective takes you. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And, it also identifies process. I'm thinking of one red team we did in particular where, in the process that a user got suspicious and they submitted a password change request, right, to help desk, which, that's just basic 101. So we changed the password. And in that case, the help desk responded and said, yeah, that's perfectly normal. Nothing to worry about. Have a great day. No need for a password reset. And we're like, whoa, and those kind of things you're never going to identify in just a more of a specific environment pen test. So that's another good advantage to a red team.
Understood. Understood. What's been your most exciting as an organization, Raxis? Without going into names, because we don't do that. Let's go through some more of exciting pen tests that you've done, from maybe physical or entirely digital.
I mean, the bank comes to mind. Obviously, that was a pretty good one. That was very robust.
I'd love to hear about that bank. I mean, Brad kind of gave you a small teaser the other week about that.
The power company in Texas where I got shot at, that's another one. Brad always likes to pull that story out.
I do always like to tell people that Brian likes getting shot at. So his wife wishes I wouldn't say that, but it always gets people going, wait, what?
Yeah.
We talk about the bank we did. That was, I think that was really eye-opening, where we had basically as a 5-day engagement with a good bit of our team involved. So, multiple resource engagement. The only thing that we knew for sure going into it was 3 physical locations, and we didn't even know what those locations were. So we land on Sunday night, and we've basically got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday on the ground. And, and Brian and I were actually on the physical together on that, breaking into the bank. And that's always fun, right? Mm-hmm. You can say I broke into a bank and guys in black suits don't come and drag you away. We found out that one of those locations was actually their data center. And out of thousands of employees, I think 5 people had access to it. So they're like, you guys won't get in there. And we did multiple attack vectors on that. But really, in the end of 4 days, we had infiltrated all 3 of the physical locations. We had hacked their API. We were able to show proof of concept of defacing the website. We had full internal privileges on the network, completely undetected. We were able to initiate and approve financial transactions, and that was all by 5 p.m. on Thursday. And they were just like, wow, and so that kind of information is really helpful, because you have a customer that believes they've got a very strong security posture. I mean, they got guys with guns walking around the properties, and and some of what they're doing was no joke. And that data center, was protected by a man trap. It was significant. And, to have a team come in 4 days, go, here's everything, and here's how we did it. That's a lot of actionable information for them to take back.
I mean, you could drive an entire security roadmap over a calendar year based on a report like that. I mean, you've just talked about the whole NIST 853 framework right there, from physical to media to API to all the way through. That's pretty impressive. What was the reaction? So was that more of a come at me, bro style engagement where they just said, here's our location, let's see what you can do? Or was that an engagement where you had a very clear mandate on what the objective was?
It was kind of in between. I mean, they gave us some information, but there were pretty clearly established boundaries. For example, we had certain team members that were working on the internal network side, and they were just kind of siloed off doing their own thing. And then our job, Brad and I, we were to emulate the external attackers trying to get physical access to the buildings, and then from there try to pivot to information services and whatnot. So they did set up some boundaries, but it was very open-ended, and they didn't give us a lot of information to go with. So they really wanted it to be sort of, I don't want to say red teamy, but they wanted us to be as true to nature as an emulation of a real attack, right? So they didn't silo off a technology attack, or they just kind of left it all open, like, hey, if you can get in, do it. Yeah,
and I think that's another example, especially with a small specialist team like we have here at Raxis, is when we got there, they started seeing the findings, because we were sharing things as we went along, especially the critical findings. And they actually pulled me and Brian into a room, and they was like, look, we know that you're trying to circumvent armed security, but we'd like you guys to go directly to a guy with a gun and see if you can talk your way in.
We're like, what?
Right?
So we just doubled the statement of work, right? Yeah.
And so that's kind of a great case when we're in the middle of the engagement, the customer can say, hey, I know we're doing this. Can we pivot a little bit and go at it this way? And we're like, yeah, sure. We'll give that a whirl.
Interesting. Okay. So I think that's one of the great things. Like, I've been on the blue teams for most of my career, right? So that's why I go deep on that space. So one of the things I've loved is purple teaming, right? Mm-hmm. It's where you bring the red team and the blue team together, and you say, okay, so for the next 48 hours, come at, and then we'll debrief and see where we go, and then do it and watch, rinse, and repeat. So it sounds like you guys are also engaging in purple team exercises as well.
Correct. I'm actually we finished up one last week. So, yep. It was pretty interesting. Yeah.
So a lot of security leaders, I think, would benefit from knowing kind of what is the best path forward for a maturity, right? Where do you kind of start? Maybe it's like you start with the pen test, then you move to the purple team, then the red team. Like, what is that progression? So organizations are getting the most value out of engaging someone like you, right? Because if you come at too much too fast, they're like, well, yeah, we knew we had weak security. That doesn't really help us, right? So where's that logical progression?
Well, that's like, when I talk to customers, I'm oftentimes saying, if you've never done a pen test, you probably don't want to start with red team, right? Unless you have some sort of specific driver saying you have to do it, you really need to get an idea of what your individual environments are. And then also knowing the company, because what comes to mind, we recently did a job where the company called and said, hey, we want a red team. And I said, great. Have you ever done a pen test? Yes, we did pen testing last year. All green, like we were stellar reports. We were rock solid. We want you to come at us and see where the cracks are. And like, awesome. And so we signed up for, I think it was a 3-week red team for them. And Brian, what was the end of the first day? I think from the external, the engineer had made the bridge and had full DA on their internal network. And they were like,
are you talking about the large retail?
No. This was a financial customer.
But I mean, the ability to go for something like that in a short period of time from the outside world into domain admins on the inside is unfortunately not unheard of, right? It's unfortunately more of the reality versus the exception versus the rule, right?
Well, it's not typical, but it's, especially in environments where you extend the network perimeter outside of the premises, like wireless networks and whatnot, it becomes more of a possibility. I mean, I wouldn't say it's typical, but it happens.
Got it.
Yeah, so in their case, with what they found, and I think this is really important, they said, wow, what we've learned from this is not all security companies are the same. Because over the course of that 3 weeks, we just kept getting in. We got in the first way and we stopped and went a different way. We got in that way, we stopped. We tried a different way, we got in. And the whole time we're communicating, obviously, their team. And, and they're baffled. They're like, how did we get such a great report last year from a different company? And now that we're in red team, we're seeing over and over and over success. And again, to that whole pivoting thing, their team went from, wow, this is awesome, you're like really showing us stuff, to very quickly, oh, this is bad. How do we explain this? And we actually pivoted in that last week of the engagement and actually reduced the red team effort, went to some consulting effort, and kind of helped them understand how to frame it in the context of what they were looking at and kind of give them a roadmap forward.
That's amazing, because I know, like myself and other security leaders in the space, they're like, it's that next step, right? It's always a fun engagement. Yeah, everything, it's flashy and shiny, and you're like, wow, I'm getting all this new information. But then what, right? You got to go explain this. You got to position this in a way where you can take the program forward.
Absolutely. It's great to be a mic dropper, but someone's got to come pick that mic up afterwards, right? You don't want their day to go badly. That's really where the stickiness is with customers, is that they appreciate that you don't just walk away, for beers and burgers, that you actually stay around, like, look, here's what we did, and here's how I'm going to help empower you to, one, articulate this to your leadership so it works out well for you and they get the right message, but also, what do you want to do with security? What's your vision, and how does this work into that as far as, propelling it or empowering you in your directives?
Yeah, and that's a key component, because people oftentimes, especially if they've never done a pen test or a red team, they don't know what to expect. I mean, I remember we were on a kickoff call, it's been a couple years ago, but the customer actually asked, are you guys going to show up in hoodies? That mentality of what is a hacker. And I think there's this idea of, the kid in their basement, or the nation state actor, this kind of thing. And so when you're bringing in a team like Raxis, to know that, first of all, we're going to show up dressed just like you, and we're going to be able to speak to, whether it's, it's the IT team, it's management team, it's a C-suite, you're going to be comfortable bringing an engineer in and letting them speak with you. And, I think that's a big part of it, and a big part of that follow-up, like Brian was talking about.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, we do have a little thing in place where, your first time, if you're a new hire, your first time you come in, you get domain admin, we do give you a company hoodie. So you do have a logo hoodie that has the name and all that stuff on it. So you do actually get the hacker hoodie, but you got to earn it a little bit first.
Got to work for it.
Yeah.
Very Spartan of you. I like that. Eddie, so So we also, we're currently living in this strange COVID land, right? Where things are a little different, where people may not, where the reliance on the physical office in our relationship with that physical office has changed a little bit. And so I'd like to get from your perspective, right? I've seen a few different trends picking up, and I just like, one is where people are less reliant on that office. So maybe that's that direct access into their data center or their cloud instance, maybe being turned down or going away. So the relationship of the core office. And then also everyone's on Zoom, right? Like I think a lot of people are still looking at Zoom and other communications technologies as a secure way to replace the office. But I have heard of like some attacks of like people living in Zoom and things of that nature. So as we're going through this COVID transition where there's more video conferencing and less face-to-face in offices, what's that looking like from an attack surface perspective? How is that changing the game for you guys?
That's an interesting question. There are some changes with the personnel shift. I mean, it's the whole network architecture is shifting to a more disparate, star spread out model, like a spoke and hub thing. And that has advantages and disadvantages to us and to the customer. So if you have an environment with a bunch of workers that are spread out all over the place, typically you don't have adherence to process very well, right? So they're not in the office, they're not in the routine, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And a lot of times they're running personal stuff on their laptop, whatever. And you introduce vulnerabilities that way, we can, phish them, we can, send exploits. A lot of times the Soho routers are vulnerable to back-end stuff. Like well, I don't mention brands, but there's several that are well known that are vulnerable to direct attack. And also it leaves the facilities, pretty bare. So if they do have assets at the facility, it's much easier to walk in and have a field day. So there's that aspect as well.
Yeah, we're talking off camera. We had another guest on the podcast where they do physical security, and they're talking about one of their major drivers is because people like armed guards aren't physically present due to COVID, they can't be there. Who's now watching the gate? Who's now watching the manhole? Who's now watching access to that office? And so they have their way of they're helping that market. I've been reading about this idea of like this Zoom, compromising Zooms, like you get compromised a mailbox and then you use that to get in someone's Zoom before. And I just think it's fascinating that like, as we're adopting these technologies, we're solving certain problems. I guess it's kind of like tales old as time, right? We're solving certain problems, but then we're opening up other avenues for exploitation as well. How have you seen the market change, right? So you got a lot of people who are now very cloud native, right? Who their critical workloads are AWS, Azure, GCP. Have we solved the problems of the data center security 10 years ago? Have we just created more problems for ourselves? Like, how's it going?
I mean, that's always going to be the case, right? As technology changes and the way people interact with technology changes, vulnerabilities are going to be fixed and vulnerabilities are going to be introduced, right? So it's a matter of keeping track of those, keeping pace, and making sure the customer stays vigilant about what to do and what not to do. Certainly, the cloud side has its own advantages, right? I mean, if you provision an AWS box, it's pretty secure by default. You have to really sort of go in and break some stuff to make AWS vulnerable, out of the box. So there's that challenge. But then you also have, when you have a cloud-centric infrastructure, you also have all these users everywhere, and it always comes back to the human. What can you get the human to do? Or does the human understand how to interact with the cloud properly? Are they taking the security measures that they should be? That sort of thing. So in a lot of cases, when we get cloud environment access, it is through an end user. We phish them, we get their credentials or something like that, where we exploit their machine and then go after their cloud access. Because the nice thing about cloud access is like, okay, so if I'm attacking you in an external to internal situation, I no longer have to like navigate your network. All your stuff is out in the cloud. And once I have credentials, it's all there to go through and pick through, right? So that access, once you have it, it's much more straightforward and less complicated for me as an adversary to go in and get to that. So there's ups and downs to it. It's all about process and making sure you're covered and that sort of thing.
I guess, yeah, it's like the new boundary is the identity, right? We've kind of lost the traditional boundary of like, hey,
I think that's an excellent way to put it. Yeah.
Everything's behind this firewall. And so, I mean, we had some conversations, those podcasts, and we have the community, and we talk about the struggle of managing identities, because there's the managing the person who accesses the identity, and then there's the system identity that does its own thing, and just kind of the whole, how do you give just enough permissions just in time to solve this problem? And again, we can have a whole conversation on identity access management, right? It's its own entire universe, and then not solve the other areas of the problem as well. So let's go back to some of the red teaming. Because I'd love to hear some of the. You guys gave us a taste of some of the stories. Like one of them, I want to hear how Brian got shot at. That's what I really want to hear. Is like, what is this?
Everybody wants to hear how Brian.
Everybody wants that story, right? No, so it was an engagement we did with an EMC out in Texas, right? And if you're in Texas and you're not carrying a gun, people question that, right? So it's already kind of an interesting environment there on its own. So this place was out in the middle of nowhere, and part of the engagement was to infiltrate the main office and then one of their satellite offices. So they had these little satellite billing offices that have some electrical components there and some distribution components there, but not much. And the way it was situated was that you had the building, and then you had this big yard around back, right? A big fenced-in yard where they keep all the transformers and trucks and poles and all this kind of stuff. And so we had a couple vectors. They had the infrared door sensors, the passive infrared door sensors. We could trip those. We demonstrated that, and they really wanted to see if we could go around back from the yard to get in that way, because they had some controls on the backside that were slightly different. And as it happened, the yard backed up to this really sketch housing project, right? And so I'm tooling around the back of this fence looking for soft spots in the fence and that kind of thing. And then a gunfight breaks out, 100 feet away from me. And there's yelling and screaming and glasses breaking. And I was like, oh crap, so I actually dove into a culvert. It was just like up to my knees in mud. And I just, kind of skirming under there and hid there while the cops came. And I could see the lights blinking everywhere, but it was like, I'm not going to pop out of this thing and be like the guy that shoots up out of the woods with these cops,
I told you
so I was there
Mission
for a good
Impossible.
4 hours. Yeah, it was interesting.
4 hours up to your knees in mud.
Yeah, it was great.
I hope you didn't wear an expensive suit.
We got in, and it was a good thing. So it definitely makes for good stories sometimes.
And so from that story, Brian likes to get shot at.
Yeah,
got it. That makes total sense.
Yeah, we bridged that to a sales positioning. Like, he loves it. It's great.
It's like, we will go to all the lengths to
actually,
give our customers.
There's a couple customers where that was the ringer, wasn't it, Brad? Where they're like, oh wow, you guys are serious. So
yeah, and it's always interesting to me when we have conversations with customers out of the gate, and they say things like, we have armed security, or we've got mag locks on the building locks after a certain time, you're not going to get in. And with a lot of those badge systems in particular, I mean, you're really more secure with a physical key. We've got weaponized badge readers that get within 3 or 4 feet of an employee, and it'll download the information off that. We've got the systems where we download and we go back and write it and come back. But, we've even got systems that literally it reads it, and then we have a writer and a RFID protected pouch, and it immediately writes it. So someone can come out the door, we can walk past them, we can pull the badge out and walk right back in as them. And, that often surprises customers. And they're like, well, and they typically say what you say, well, that's James Bond stuff. That's high level, expensive stuff. And we're like, no, I mean, you can build these with plans online for what, Brian, $700-800.
Yeah, thereabouts.
And, you can buy them ready to go from, all polished and wrung out for what, $1,200-1,500. So
yeah,
not really looking at an expensive or really an overly complex attack, but we have this false protection of, well, I have this plastic card, so that, and there are some systems that are robust, but most systems out there aren't, and they're surprised when we're able to infiltrate something so easily that way.
I mean, for $1,200 to be able to walk through the front door, that's a really low barrier to entry, especially when you're going to walk into something where you believe is protected and there's something valuable on the other side.
Right. Yeah.
You guys are we talk about banks here, but I mean, the amount of just fine art that is in financial services organizations as just their decor, just being able to walk in for $1,200 and walk out with $20,000 worth of art. That's a real attack. It's a real risk.
Well, even more than that, we commonly see, and I'm not talking just financial institutions, anywhere we do this, it's pretty common to see just stacks of blank checks or stacks of checks with signatures on them. Employees that aren't doing clean desk policies, they're leaving passwords out in the clear. I mean, it's just a treasure trove of information once we get into the facility, which usually comes from a a false feeling of security that, well, we have these things in place. And, I think one of the biggest value to doing a physical or doing a red team is customers, when you start talking about an internal network, and Brian, you can probably jump in here too, but, most customers go, well, yeah, it's our internal, you'd have to get to it. And,
Yep.
We can have conversations, when we reach an internal. So for the context of this conversation, that's, someone like Brian showing up at your facility with a Raxis laptop, no knowledge of the infrastructure whatsoever, plugging into an active port and going to town. And so under those guidelines on an internal, we see an impactful breach 85% of the time. And that's usually in a 5-day testing window or less.
Yeah.
And so, then the customer's reaction is, well, yeah, but that's my internal. And so when they see us come in with a physical, or they see us come in with phishing or some sort of malware or phone calls, or where you'd be surprised the number of people you call and basically say, I need your password, and they give it to you, right? When we're able to demonstrate how easily we can get to that internal from the outside, now all of a sudden they start paying attention. And, a lot of customers are very interested about what can you do from the outside, but the internal is at huge risk, and the internal is usually reachable much easier than most customers give it credit for.
That makes complete sense. And I mean, especially when you talk about, like we referred to earlier, as like the boundary and the borders, like melting away, and the identity and the individual. So the identity and the data is really becoming the new perimeter. Now you've just, that one fish is now available on a mobile device, and someone's clicking that, and you have creds going over, stealing OAuth tokens, and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, when you're able to, for $1,500, you'll walk through the front door and plug into a LAN, and then just run your LLM and R, or looking for creds going across the network. Like, where do security leaders start? Like, how do they start breaking this down, right? We know about defense in depth. We know it's not a good idea to put all your eggs in one basket. But if you're going to give some, like, I don't know, maybe top 10 recommendations, or just help frame the risk and so it can be solutioned, where should people start solving that problem, or start to begin solving that problem?
Yeah, I mean, if I had to put, like, if you came to me and said, Brian, give me one security recommendation for the world that will make everything way, way better, I would say, use decent password management. That's it. I mean, there's very rarely an engagement that we do where a bad password doesn't come into play or get cracked or something like that allows us privilege escalation.
Got it. Okay, so password management, and I'm inferring with 2FA.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. If you can. If you can't, then, a highly complex, password manager type of thing that you would have unique passwords per system and that sort of stuff. So, yeah.
Got it. Makes complete sense. And is there any like we've talked about offline a little bit, like the diamond model or any other frameworks that we're thinking about risk? Like, is it really just as simple as like, hey, let's use common sense, walk through the infrastructure you're managing and just kind of layer it one to the other? Or are there any thoughts that we can, ways we can structure our thinking around this problem?
So we do some framework level assessments, right? And this typically would come before the pen test discussion, right? Because if you do a pen test and you don't have the block and tackle stuff, we're just going to find everything and there's no value to it, right? The value in a pen test is finding the subtleties that get overlooked in the blue team exercises and the things that aren't accounted for in design, right? So that's where the value is there. As far as frameworks go, we have multiple frameworks we work with. Typically, when we approach a company, we want to articulate what your security maturity is. We lean on the CIS-20 because that is very business relevant, and it can articulate gaps in a very granular manner, and it maps well to the organization. So that's if we go and do that, we typically go with that framework. Some of our customers use NIST. NIST gets very, very granular, but it's not applicable to every organization, right? So. That's those two are the two sweet spots we play in as far as assessment and maturity frameworks go.
Got it. Okay. So in the back of my head, I'm just thinking like, the next time at some point I'm allowed to speak to other human beings and be next to them and share a glass of wine, I'm sure that day will come. But, so we're having a conversation on wine. It's advising people start with a CIS-20, get your ducks in a row and just get that foundation in place, then move on to a pen test, then a purple team, then a red team. Is that sounds like the logical progression that we should be looking at?
Yeah, I think that's pretty decent. You really want to match the engagement to the customer so that that they get the value out of it. So if you're we have two flavors of maturity assessments: the framework level assessment and the full CIS-20. And the framework is basically a higher level grouping of, say, has 20 controls for the most part. And so for something like a small law office, that makes more sense than a full enterprise. Like, what is your incident response plan? What is your identity access management strategy? And that kind of stuff. They don't have any of that. They're just like, okay, they need to be told they need decent passwords is what they need to be told, not
Understood.
to have all these things, right? So we want to tailor that to the customer, and want to make sure that they work from a ground up approach to remediate the low hanging fruit, because, security in a way is always a numbers game. You just want to be more secure than everybody else. There's never going to be 100%, but if your neighbor leaves his door open, you're in much better shape than you would be, right?
Got it. So just be the guy who could run faster when they're being chased by the bear.
Exactly. I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you, right? So there's that aspect as well. If you've got 80% of your security ducks in a row, you're actually in pretty good shape as far as a targeting perspective goes, because when people target organizations, they're conscious of their time, right? So they only want to spend so much time looking at something. They're like, okay, this guy's hardened or this guy's easy, we'll move along. There's just so much of a target-rich environment that the easy fruit is where it's at.
Yeah.
And you talked a lot earlier, you were talking about this idea of moving to remote. And, there's a lot of vulnerabilities out there that I think companies by and large aren't thinking through yet. Brian kind of alluded to earlier, if we can get access to an end user's device, then it's pretty much the bets are off that point. We're in that machine. And the ways we can exploit devices, whether it's something like mouse jack, coming through a wireless mouse, or, you have hackers that are just opportunists drive up and down the road, right? Mm-hmm. They're looking for wireless signals that maybe aren't encrypted properly, or they can jump and then they get on and happen to go, oh, well, this is now big XYZ corporation. But they didn't necessarily target that person. Or you have executives at home. That's part of what we do sometimes as well, is go out to executives, their states, and look at how their security is set up, because they're tying back in, right? If you can get in there, you can get it. So where's the weak point? And kind of, I think, a point in case with this, Brian and I were visiting a new customer, and I remember walking through their facility, and Brian and I just can't help ourselves. We're always kind of looking around going, how did we get into this place, right? And they were tight. Brian and I both left with, man, I don't know if we'd be able to physically get in there. Like, it was a challenge. And then fast forward a week later, and we're at another facility, and we tailgated in with no problem, right? And the second we got in that facility, we were in everything. And so it always comes down to weakest link. You can put all your effort where the kind of the sex appeal is, but we're looking for, how can I get in there the easy way? A hacker is always going to look for the least resistant and the least risk, right? We don't want to get caught, and most hackers don't want to work real hard. And so we're looking for those areas. And now with remote, how do you know that your employee is not letting their children use the laptop, and you think maybe they're watching Netflix, but they're on a torrent, or they're in some dangerous area of the internet where malware is getting loaded, and now it becomes an opportunistic thing. And do you know that's protected? I think we're going to see companies really beginning to evolve, looking at how do we do that type of protection and assessment now that we're outside our brick and mortar building.
Couldn't agree more. And we've definitely, from my experience, I've seen a lot of people, it's like, you'd be silly to think that people who have taken their laptops home due to COVID are not playing video games on it, are not watching Netflix on it, are not doing silly, high risk activities on this corporate asset that VPNs back into your data center or back into your cloud instance, and has access to all of these things. Right.
And unknowingly, right? I mean, what we find is most people are very nice, right? Most people, they want to show up, they want to do their job, they want to do it well, but they don't understand what they're opening themselves up to. And we talk with customers all the time. One of the common things we hear is, man, you guys must feel bad because everyone gets fired when you all leave. And we're like, I mean, we certainly hope not, right? Because what we see out of a service like red teaming or pen testing is you're able to go to your customer base now and say, hey, John, do you remember you got this email and it looked kind of weird, but you clicked on it and you logged in. It looked like the company side, and then it came back and said, sorry, we're experiencing technical difficulty. It's like, yeah, I remember that. Did that seem odd? Yeah, it kind of seemed odd. Did you report it? No. Okay, well, that was an assessment, right? And that was actually a very cleverly designed fish. And as a result, they got into this, they got into this, they got into this, and they got in all of our customer database as a result. And instead of having this carrot and stick relationship with your customer, you're now able to kind of pull the curtain back and say, this is why this policy's here. This is why the procedure's here. This is why, if you scratch your head and go, man, maybe I shouldn't have clicked that, we want you to call help desk. We want you to tell you it happened. And so our hope is now your employees are going, I understand why that's there. And you build allies instead of divisions. And so it's no longer, people look at security as, well, you're just infringing on my ability to do my job. So I'm going to stand up Dropbox, right? And you're like, well, we have a reason you can't do that. But now the employees begin to understand what that reason is, and they really get on your side. And I think that's where you really start to see security posture improve.
Got it. Okay, so using more of a data-driven, narrative-driven way to build allies inside the organization is one of the things they could be doing with the reports. They bring you in, you do the assessment, and then it gets synthesized into, hey, next time you see this, here's the total impact, here's the narrative and the overarching story. People go, got it. Okay.
Hopefully. It doesn't always work that way, but the thing is that I had one customer where I got past the front desk. It was a social engineering agent, got past the front desk, and they just fired her on the spot. And I was like, that was stupid. Why? She's the most secure person in your organization right now because she just got burned. You know what I mean? So her level of vigilance is through the roof. You need to keep her around. You need to let her evangelize her experience. And that could be but no, they just fired it and then brought someone else in without the experience, without the feedback and all that. Is just going to get caught again. So hopefully that's what happens, is that they take those resources and use that to grow rather than to try to weed things out. It's a better way to do it. Yeah,
you can't fire your way to a more secure
company. Exactly.
You can't fire your way to a more resilient world. It's like, no, we got to work together on this one. This has been fantastic. So, I still firmly believe you are deeply in the 007 space of our cybersecurity market.
A lot of paperwork. I don't know. 007 doesn't do that much reports.
At least not on the movie. That's why it takes 4 years for the next movie to come out. He's catching up on all his backlog.
All the paperwork, all the paperwork and all the reporting.
There it goes. So, gentlemen, I want to leave the audience with one thing. If there was one thing, I think, Brian, we know what yours is, but there's one thing you're going to leave the audience with to really help crystallize next steps. What is it, security leaders, we need to be doing to bring innovation into the platform, innovate on security as we live in this dynamic space? What would be some parting thoughts or wisdom for the audience?
You want to take that? I can speak to that, Brad, or you can speak to it, whichever.
Well, I want you to speak to it, but I think the core of it is what we always say: you don't know what you don't know. I think when the best steps is taking that step to say, let's do some assessments and let's find out what we don't know and let's figure out how to attack those problems.
Yeah, that was kind of where I was going, was that you need to understand what you have first of all. And I've worked in many large organizations where we would bring in a consultant, and the first thing the consultant would be tasked with was tell us what we have. And it's like, that is the wrong question to be asking at that point. You should know what you have and you should be providing that. So just not even knowing what systems are in your environment and what vulnerabilities they may present or what their posturing is, that's definitely step one, is getting a risk inventory and trying to understand exactly where you are so you can make the decisions to grow, what to do, what to focus on, that sort of stuff.
Got it. Okay. So bring visibility. If you don't know what you don't know, get an asset inventory, hire Raxis. They're the three steps passwords. I heard. Okay.
Yeah. And passwords.
And passwords. Yeah.
Sounds right.
That sounds like a plan. Well, gentlemen, I just want to thank you so much for your time today. I've had a blast. I've definitely learned a lot. I think the ability to do $1,500 key fob mirroring, the ability that you're willing to get shot at for your clients. I think these are great things for us to know, that like how far you're willing to go and how exciting this world is that you work in.
Yeah, it is. We really love what we do. That's for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, gentlemen, thank you again for your time, and thank you for being on the podcast.
All right. Thanks a lot. It's good to.